Alrighty, everyone. So we are going to start kicking off from now. Yiva, if I could just get you to put your camera on so our lovely attendees can see our third speaker. So welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming along tonight, and welcome to all of our audience and our speaker joining us online. It's wonderful to see such a really great turnout for this topic that is obviously important to a lot of people working in the sector or looking to get into it, something that we all need to consider. And I would especially like to welcome our fabulous speakers for the night, Yiva Avakyan, Corinne Habel, and Anshu Adhikari, and I will give them a full introduction shortly. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we gather, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who have lived, loved, and raised their children on these lands for thousands of years. As we discuss the future of aid funding tonight, domestic and international, let's remember to always maintain a commitment to funding and maintaining reconciliation initiatives and supporting Indigenous people to advocate for financial support and independence in Australia and around the world. So in saying that, I would like to pay my respect to all elders, past, present, and emerging of the Gadigal people, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. And I would like to acknowledge that sovereignty of these lands was never ceded. I feel like I can hear a little echo coming from over there, but we'll figure that out. All right. Is the sound okay for everyone online? Sounds good? Okay. All right, so on to some general obligatory information about women in aid and development. We are a membership organisation for all women who work in or aspire to work in the international development and humanitarian aid sectors, inclusive of trans women and non-binary people. We're part of a global community of professionals, and we'd love for you to join us in celebrating women across the sector, sharing our experiences, and supporting and inspiring each other to pursue and succeed in leadership roles. You can connect with us and other fantastic women in the community by engaging with our Facebook and LinkedIn pages. If you're particularly inspired by anything you hear tonight that you'd like to share, please tag us, because we would always love to know what your key takeaways were and if you have any feedback. My name is Jamie Lee McLaughlin. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll be facilitating this evening's session. I'm currently working with the Australian Red Cross in the disaster preparedness space, and I have a background of experience in higher education, government, and the volunteering space. I'm also a member of the Women in Aid and Development Events Committee, which meets regularly to discuss ideas for these events, organise them, and find speakers. I'd like to acknowledge my fellow Women in Aid and Development people, including our fabulous volunteers, our board members, and of course, our wonderful chair, Chris Franks, who also doubles as our IT support at these events. I think you're doing great. So just some quick housekeeping before we begin. The bathroom is just around there. There's only one, so if the door is closed, we're just going to have to queue, unfortunately. And our emergency exit is over there. Please help yourself to food and drink throughout the evening, and feel free to grab any leftovers at the end of the night to take home. We don't want to do any waste. We'll have plenty of time for more chatting and networking after we finish our speaker sessions, so please feel free to keep networking and discussing afterwards until we kick you out. And our session tonight is being recorded, so we'll share that on our YouTube channel so you can listen back and share with others if there was something that was particularly meaningful to you. So enough of my yapping, on to our topic for this evening. We are all feeling quite concerned about the future shape and size of the sector following the withdrawal of USAID earlier this year, and the reduction of funding by many other countries following suit. While Australia has been one shining light in maintaining our aid budget, many organisations have relied on USAID and other similar income sources that has now been reduced or removed entirely. So the critical question we need to ask is, where can organisations now secure funding for their life-saving health programs, fundamental education programs, vital infrastructure projects, and more? While we might not have all the answers to these questions, as they are rather large and existential, tonight we will be discussing this question as our speakers talk us through current sources of funding and their thoughts on innovative strategies and emerging opportunities for securing funding in the evolving aid and development landscape. We will have time for questions at the end, so I'll be guiding the discussion, but of course most of the questions are going to be from you, whether those be here in the room if something sparks your interest, or from the questions that were submitted online. So just make a note of anything that you're curious about and want to learn more, and we will ask at the end. Yes. Is the echo too much for anyone? All right, we'll work through it. We're tough. Alrighty, so I would like to properly introduce our speakers for this evening. Our first speaker online is Yiva Avakyan. She has over 2 decades of senior leadership in international development, focusing on gender equality and social justice. She has shaped global strategies, built international expertise networks, and managed major program portfolios spanning gender equality, women's and girls leadership, LGBTQI+ justice, gender-based violence, education, and child protection. Yiva began her career as a counsellor and researcher at Armenia's first domestic violence response centre after the collapse of the Soviet Union, grounding her lifelong commitment to research as a driver of social change. So thank you for coming, Yiva. Our second speaker for the night is Corinne Habel. Corinne is a highly experienced director and executive with expertise in business development and fundraising in diverse not-for-profit organisations. She brings over 20 years' experience in implementing successful and sustainable global strategies. Throughout her career, Corinne has developed new and innovative fundraising, communication, and business strategies from the ground up, which have been based on strong analytical research and planning skills and have resulted in significant revenue growth. She enjoys building relationships and developing and leading high-performance teams. Corinne is thrilled to be part of Child Fund as she is passionate about improving the lives of children and the livelihoods of women facing poverty. And finally, we are very lucky for this event to have a third speaker, Anshu Adhikari. With over 10 years of experience in the international development sector, Anshu has worked across Asia, Africa, and Australia, contributing to a range of humanitarian and development initiatives. She holds a master's degree in public policy and has worked with NGOs, international development organisations, and research institutes, if I can speak today, my goodness, to support communities facing complex social and economic challenges. Currently, she serves as the program coordinator at Caritas Australia, where she manages international development projects in Nepal, the Myanmar-Thailand border region, Indonesia, and the Philippines, focusing on sustainable development, community resilience, and inclusive partnerships. Okay. Too many pages here. So, we are very lucky to have these wonderful ladies with us tonight and the wealth of experience across all different areas that they bring. So, just to start us off, I'd like each of you to give us a few minutes overview of your experience with the funding in the aid and development sector. How has it impacted your work? Have you worked strongly in the funding space? Just so we can understand where each of you is coming from. So I might start here in the room, if you'd like to take it away, Anshu.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Is it better? Okay. I have been working in the international development sector for the past 10 years, but in different roles in different countries. Since 10 years, there have been a lot of changes, especially for the funding. Before funding was a big source of revenue for countries overseas in different parts of the world, especially the developing countries. But now funding for them is a limited resource. So now I see the shift that the different partners and actors that are making in the ground and trying to generate their own funds. Before it was more on dependency, but now it's more on generation. So it's a shift that we see in the international development, and I hope it goes in a positive way.
Thanks. I've been in the international development field and specifically in fundraising for about 25 years and have worked for some really big organizations like World Wildlife Fund in Washington, D.C. So I have a lot of experience in all sorts of different sources of revenue. And I think we were reflecting earlier tonight that things come and go. And this is one of the unfortunately very poor situations that we're in with international development. But I think we've seen the sector go through some really hard times in the past as well. And so I've got great hope that we're going to move through this and be more creative, and it's going to force us to come together.
Thank you. And passing to you online, Yiva.
Thank you. And I've been in international development for almost 25 years now, and worked with World Vision and Save the Children in a variety of roles. Started in World Vision in Lebanon, working on business development, acquisition of funding, for specifically working with Palestinian populations in Lebanon, and then moved to World Vision in Armenia, where I grew the business development team, monitoring evaluation, and my two last sort of roles with World Vision and with Save the Children have been around building out the gender equality, gender-based violence, social justice programming, and growing it both financially and growing the practice more broadly. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really great to hear sort of where you're all coming from, because we love having the different perspectives to bounce off and get a wide variety of opinions. So I guess we can start by saying you're all in, different sectors and organizations at the moment. What changes have you noticed in your specific area? I'd like to know if, some organizations have been hit harder than others. Caritas, for example, being a religious-based organization, is that a funding source that can be more relied upon or less because of those connections? So if each of you have a thought on that.
If we talk about Caritas Australia, most of our funding come from DFAT, or we raise through church networks. So we haven't been impacted by the US cuts, and we have been able to do our programs as we did before in the previous years. But if we look at different Caritas in different parts of the world, some of the Caritas receive major of their project fundings from US funding, USAID, and those Caritas has been directly impacted. The staff had made redundant, their program stopped midway. There's so many other effects. The community was affected, as well as not only the community, the suppliers, the vendors who were dependent on those source of income were also affected. So the whole region was affected. So it really depends where your funding comes from. For Caritas Australia, not so much impact, but other Caritas, there has been a huge impact.
Yeah, and likewise for Child Fund Australia, we haven't been impacted because we don't get USAID funding. Our larger partner in the US, Child Fund International, was impacted by a number of those programs. But what we were seeing is some of the downstream effects for Child Fund Australia, where some of our local partners did have USAID funding, and so those were cut, and they were coming to us to sort of backfill, and others coming in to do that. So there were some downstream impacts, even though we weren't particularly affected by USAID.
And Yeva, has much changed in your space at the moment?
I think that funding related specifically to gender equality, gender justice has come and gone over the years. And specifically, my experience is mostly working for a US organization. So I will give you a firsthand account of how everything evolved over the past few months. In the US, support for more progressive initiatives and gender justice, social justice issues sort of is dependent on the political, on the administration, obviously. And so in January of this year, when the US government froze all foreign development assistance overnight, a third of our annual global program budget vanished in just a single stroke. So things started moving at an astronomical speed. In January and February, I think end of January, we were thinking about this, that this can be mitigated by reducing staff levels of effort by a percentage, and then spent days poring over a list of staff, making decisions about voluntary reductions, and then soon realized that for an organization with so much funding and that's coming from US government, this would not be sustainable. And so in those first chaotic days, I think we moved through, and our CEO used to say, we moved through every stage of grief in the first few months, like denial, anger, bargaining, depression. I think we're still working on the acceptance bit, but from my end, the work that we had done, I was with Save the Children for over 7 years. I was brought in as an inaugural Associate Vice President for Gender Equality to build out the portfolio of work. And the work that we had done over the 7 years to build the team, the architecture of gender equality broadly, the research advocacy programs, basically vanished in just almost overnight. And so I think one of the last things I did was working with the legal team on sort of putting together guidance on gender disintegration, basically on how do we communicate, you know, that there was still hope that there will be some funding. How do we talk about the issues in a way that would still would be able to get some funding. And so I stepped down from my role, leaving one person from a team of 7, and then global architecture of gender equality has practically disappeared as well. And so, fast forward a few months, and from an international programs team of 380 people, I think we were able to keep just about over 30. So huge impact, and completely upended the work in the US.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that insight. I imagine it can't be easy to reflect on how much of an impact that's had. So thank you for sharing. And I guess that raises a question that echoes a few that were asked through the online sign-up form. Obviously, we've sort of been able to see some of those shorter term impacts that have happened right now of staff being laid off and funding being reduced. But have there started to be discussions about what the longer term, impacts are going to look like with, you know, some projects having taken years to establish? What sort of things are being put in place now that things will have to be rebuilt even when the funding does come back?
Yeah, I think, and what I've experienced, the most affected thing is about trust, because the programs, project, countries were supported for like number of decades through different international organizations and governments. But now, with that majority of funding or huge significant amount of funding being taken away, there is a big gap of trust, which even if you bring back the funding, I think the partners or the countries, they will still question, like, how can we trust you? Like, how much can we trust you? How many years can we trust you? So that spot is something we have to work on in the long term.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the trust is definitely gone for many of these programs, and I don't know that the money's coming back from that source, right? So I think we absolutely have to look for creative solutions to the same problems, but figure out a way to do it differently and better, because I don't hold out much hope that USAID is going to come back anytime soon, and some of those other European partners that have also followed suit.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with the issue of trust, etc. I think we started experiencing that even before this administration stepped in. I remember last year we were trying to partner with an organization in Asia on a LGBT equality program, and any of the sort of big organizations, big local organizations working in that field were very skeptical of USAID funding. And so they wouldn't even, the trust was never there. Let's just put it that way. So, but I think beyond the impact on, I think, the devastating impact on communities, I think after the decision was made within our organization at the time, I remember our head of Humanitarian gave me a call, and she was in tears. She was saying, look, I have to close down 15 emergency health clinic in Somalia within the next week. I'm not thinking about who will die in a month. I'm thinking about which kid will die tomorrow if we don't provide that funding. So I think there is like millions and millions of lives that will be, have been, and will continue to be affected by the cuts, but also is the sort of the chilling effect that it has had across the world on other and other donors, other governments. I know, like in the Netherlands, a new policy is Netherlands' first international policy that is restricting funding specifically for gender equality work. Sounds very familiar, but it sort of gives permissions to other authoritarian anti-rights actors to basically normalize that behavior.
Thank you. I think chilling is definitely the right word for what we're seeing, and a lot of us are very discomforted by it. But to try and take a slightly more positive look at it, Corinne, you did use the wording of creative solutions, and I think I'd like to dive into that a bit of what sort of things are you all seeing as you're actively working in this space of the workarounds people are coming up with? Have people found alternate funding sources through philanthropy? Are we pivoting a little more to locally led initiatives? What sort of paths are we taking?
I'm happy to start. Well, certainly at Child Fund, we've taken a couple different approaches. And the first is that diversification. So making sure that you've really got those diversified funding sources. And I think it's making sure that you're doing that well. And I see a lot of fundraising programs that are quite mature and they're not doing it really well. So really making sure that you're doing that key core business really, really well, and diversifying across your revenue streams. And I think philanthropy is part of that. And we're seeing a lot of organizations diversifying into philanthropy. So I think that's an interesting space. I think the gifts and wills space is really interesting as well. We've got this great wealth transfer coming, and we know it's coming. And so being really well prepared and positioned to take that on, I think is going to be another place. We're looking at sort of these quasi-commercial opportunities where you can do innovative corporate partnerships. We know that the corporates here in Australia are under-tapped and undervalued in the philanthropy space. So really looking for those sorts of opportunities and those really non-traditional partnerships. We've got a partnership with a sporting organization and some other things. So really trying to be creative in that space when you're looking for different things, but really doing your core business well too. So I think sometimes the simple answers are right in front of you.
Thank you. I work in programs, so I'll speak more about programs. So we work with partners in different parts of the world. So after the USAID funding cut, we have been working with them to understand what's their priority, what's their need, and we're focusing more on quality than quantity. And now we are also helping them to build their own organization. So 5% of the project budget is allocated for the organization development. So all of our partners have that flexibility to allocate 5% or more on the things that they want to develop. It can be fundraising, it can be human resource development, it can be business development. So we do have that flexibility. And we also support partners in establishing their fundraising plans and strategies. This was done in the past, but in a very limited, because we didn't have many resources, but now we intentionally focus our partner to build their own fundraisings. We're also helping them in strengthening their monitoring and learning capacities so that they can show the data and they can raise funds. They can reach to different donors themselves. They can have different applications submitted to different calls throughout the world. So we are supporting them in that area as well. So this is a shift that we have been doing, especially after the USAID funding cut. Before we were more focused on program, we're still focused on program, we're still focused on impact, but the organizational development and partnership, this part has taken more in effect.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to emphasize is that there will not be whatever we do, there's no other donor that can fully replace U.S. government. Historically, it accounted for the largest share of international development assistance. So we need to come to terms with that this in the sort of immediate future, that's the reality that we will be dealing with. But I think I agree with my colleague from Child Fund around like philanthropy in Australia. It is not as tapped in as it is in the US. So I think that's something that we can learn from our US colleagues. I think what the administration in the U.S. has done is not just kind of it's not just reduced the funding, but also started putting in some legal restrictions to organizations who are working on issues of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, or anti-woke laws, as they call them. And so there, and then similarly with philanthropy organizations starting to tax organizations that work in that space. So the restrictions are beyond just cutting US government funding, but also that placing that on philanthropic giving as well. And so some of the things that I have seen is like larger funders, organizations like Gates and Ford Foundation, Open Society Foundation, sort of having a conversation about pooled funding, offset aid reductions and sustain programs. And another one that, I mean, I've seen this has been kind of long in the works, but there's a lot more interest in social enterprise conversations. I think it started, one of the organizations who's been doing that for the longest time is RFSU, which is the Swedish Association for Sexuality Education. They have operated this enterprise model since 1930, I think, manufacturing condoms and funding that to using the income to fund sexual education or reproductive health programs. And their product now holds a large share of the Nordic market. So another thing that I have seen is like fee-for-service models that organizations are adopting, product sales, matching fund programs that work with corporates. So I think there has been some very increased interest in that kind of fundraising.
Thank you. Interesting points from all of you of sort of looking to where we could go from here, because we need to figure something out. I might throw straight back to you, Yiva, on this one, and then hear from all of you of, obviously, as we've mentioned several times, a lot of gender-based programs are being particularly impacted by the removal of particularly USAID, but also other funding sources. What do you think are sort of the prospects going forwards for people wanting to enter that space of, is it feasible to continue to do a gender studies degree and say you're going to specialize, or does it just need to be sneakily worked into other programs?
Great question. I just wrote a book chapter on how we tried to mainstream gender, and that really has backfired. We really a lot of the feminist principles have been co-opted by our the way we have tried to use, so to speak, master's tools to dismantle the master's house, and the feminist agenda has been really co-opted by a lot of the development institutions, with funding kind of flowing through the large development and aid institutions instead of putting that in the hand of those who are working on the ground, feminist organizations, social justice organizations. And so the sneakily integrating things into a system that's designed and equal as a neoliberal institution from the beginning is not going to work, right? So, and one thing that we need to really be aware of is that it's like the spending is not, this aid and development is not just shrinking, it's really collapsing. I think it's been accelerating for years, but what we're seeing now is unprecedented, because there's other cuts that are deliberately targeting inclusive, progressive approaches, programs that advance gender equality, women's rights, support LGBT communities. To be clear, even before, programs that focus on gender-based violence had had about less than 1% of overseas development assistance. So we're not talking about a huge amount. But this backlash is not new, right? Over the past decades, the conservative politics that are fueled by misogyny, xenophobic nationalism, extreme economic inequality, they have really systematically pushed against gender inequality, inclusive development. And so USAID's cuts to programs and similar actions in Netherlands are part of that global trend, right? They demonstrate that I think there is a reason why gender is not sort of an optional priority. It is a battleground in a way, right? And so I think those actors are very well resourced, very strategic, and I think between 2008 and 2017, those anti-rights, anti-gender organizations spent over $1 billion overseas, right? So you have those actors who are very unlikely bedfellows. You have the Russian sort of authoritarian regimes, and you have American evangelical groups. You have that, but they're working together around a goal where a lot of the progressive movements have not been able to come together for one reason or another to advance the. So I think going back to, and this is. It's very fragile, right? The gains are, we don't realize how fragile all the gains are. And so, and I think we are very well insulated. While we're very well insulated here in Australia, we're not completely protected from that. So I think addressing those, safeguarding those gains through whether it's advocacy, political engagement, etc., is really important.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, and from our speakers in the room, thoughts on, protecting those gender-based programs and future of them. What are we doing?
Yeah, this is an interesting question for me because my daughter is just finishing a degree in gender studies at USAID. And so when she first started that degree, I kind of said, what are you going to do with that, right? And I thought, oh, you can go work for UN Women, or you can do one of these programs. And you're right, it's collapsing. It's not going down, it's collapsing. But I think battlefield is the right word, and we cannot give up ground on this. And so I would encourage, as I encourage my own daughter, to continue the fight. And we absolutely have to continue to encourage young women to go into these studies for as hard as it's going to be. We still know that girls and young women around the world aren't getting the education they need. Child marriage, child poverty is still a huge issue for all of us, and we can't stop.
Yeah, I agree. I also think like most people who study or work or, advocate against gender violence or work for gender rights are passionate about gender, about equality, about development. So I don't think any money can take that away. If you are passionate, if you really want to do good, and there is a huge need, there is a need everywhere in the world. Maybe some part of Australia, it's doing good, but many part of Australia, we do need that expert, we need that support. So if yes, you are passionate about, there is always a way to find, to help, to support, and humans are creative. They will find a way to raise funds. They will find a way to make money, I think. And once you have that money, no one can stop you. Yeah.
Thank you. Weirdly, I'm feeling a little better after that round. I'm going, okay, there's methods forward. There's things we can do. So I might have a look. Does anyone have a question in the audience? I have some more prepared if everyone's feeling shy, but does anyone? Oh, Stav, we've got a question back there. Yeah. Could we run the speaker mic up, perhaps, Chris? Thank you. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, thank you very much.
It is now. I've got a question about, what you see the role of governments being I don't know if you saw, there was an interesting article yesterday in the New York Times by Rajiv Shah, who used to head USAID and now works for the Rockefeller Foundation. It was a bit of a provocative title saying foreign aid is mostly gone. It's being replaced with something better. I don't know if anyone saw it. I'd love to hear your take on it. And I mean, I don't know, just the skimming that I do. I don't read anymore. I just skim because there's so much out there. But the notion I got is that governments are going to step in. But we also know that governments around the world, authoritarians, aren't necessarily sort of focusing on the most vulnerable or on social safety nets and so forth. So just interested in your view on the article, if you read it, but also just more broadly how you see the governments of the countries where you work sort of responding and perhaps doing something different, or dare I say it, better.
Interestingly, I read that article this morning and wrote that down in my notes. I think it was a really interesting take on where we are and what governments can do, and had some good examples of government stepping in on electricity projects and school lunches. So really the notion was that governments know best, and it is sort of that locally led development. And they gave an example of one country that had to put, had 50 policies in place to do something. And they said, we don't need 50 policies, we need action. So the government stepping in on action. But we also know that debt is one of the driving factors. I know Caritas does a lot of work in this area, so I'll let you talk more about that. But is one of the driving factors between poverty, and that they don't spend on local programs because they can't afford to. And that's the first thing that often goes. So I'm a bit mixed on that one.
We have been advocating to DFAT at Caritas that to increase the funding, to make it more flexible. The ODA is about 5 billion, but that's a very small amount to fill the gap of 60 billion that the US funding cut has impacted. So we do advocate to DFAT now and then. And I see, I do programs. So I do some ANCP, which is the DFAT funded projects. And I do see some minor changes, which does reflect their flexibility. For example, recently there was a question where we had to answer how much to do the portion of the funding goes to the local partner, to the local community. That was never before in the ANCP questions, but this time we have. And there was also flexibility to increase the funding from 10% to 20% for locally led development, for local organization to build a capacity. So that wasn't before, that was just happened last year. So after the US funding cut. So I see some flexibility that DFAT is doing. So from Australian government, I feel like they do provide some kind of, changes. In other governments, I can't speak because I haven't worked with them. But countries that I work with, for example, Nepal, in Myanmar, Myanmar, we can't speak about the government for now. So let's talk about Nepal. So Nepal has collaborated with private agencies to do some development work because a lot of funding had been cut. So the governments are trying to explore different avenues to get funds. Yeah.
Thank you. Any thoughts from you, Eva?
Yeah, I had not read the article. I just skimmed through it just now. But one thing that comes to mind is the launch of the Accra Reset at UN General Assembly, which is led by the president of Ghana and global leaders, sorry, he's the president of he's an African Union champion for African financial institutions. So, and what happened, what is part of it is a framework kind of for re-engineering global development institutions, financing and partnerships, because the sustainable development goals are coming to a close. And so, there's no question that the global development architecture needed some kind of a reform, but and with COVID, that erased decades of progress. Climate shock, it has exacerbated the issues, but and with fewer than half of the SDGs that are on track, they are arguing that development as usual must end. And so this is an attempt to not just redesign the targets, but to design the institutions and financing systems that actually work, right? And so workability, meaning innovative financing instrument, new business models, better coalitions that kind of multiply resources. And so yeah, it's a new architecture that is anchored in sovereignty and workability, shared value. And so what they will do is that I think they're planning to use the health sector as the entry point and proof of concept to transition from aid dependency to health sovereignty. I think that includes looking at adding the health tax, etc. So there are some things that are starting to happen on sort of global level. But I probably am a little less optimistic than Rajiv Shah, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was a wonderful question. I need to go home and read that article, I think. Do we have any questions online? We do have the chat up here, so if any of you ask them, we will see them. Any questions from the room as well? We will also be hanging out afterwards to do some networking. So if you've got questions you'd prefer to ask to one person or just individually, we can do that. I might ask an interesting one that we got through online. For people who are looking to enter the sector or potentially people existing who want to upskill or move around, do you think this will change the skills and experience that you need to work in this sector? Should people be prioritizing project management, getting into that fundraising space to fully understand how these impacts might affect their work in the future?
That's a good question because it directly impacts me. I wouldn't say I am at my senior career. I'm just getting there. So yes, I do feel like now I have to understand more of a fundraising. And I also feel like we do have to advocate and promote the local led development because this is where the actual work is happening and this is where the actual money will come in the future. So we do have to approach in a way that benefits the partner and then listen to what they have to say rather than laying out what are our compliance or what are our things that the partners has to meet. And I also do that, not only fundraising, we do also have to work with different avenues. It can be corporate, it can be social enterprises, it can be governments or local councils. So all of these different avenues also have the smaller projects that they do in their own capacity. But we do have to explore other avenues if we want to continue working in the development sector.
Thanks. And I would agree about locally led development and making sure that's one of the things we've been focusing on at Child Fund as well, is really making sure that we've got fundraising plans at that local level and really advocating for that. I think advocacy skills are going to become more and more important as we really work with governments and other stakeholders to really look at what that funding model looks like. And I think fundraisers, not in the traditional sense, but people that can think really creatively. So how do you find people from the for-profit sector that want to come in to work with us and have different skill sets and different ways of thinking, I think is one of the things that we'll be looking for, certainly.
Yeah, I think we want to draw a parallel with what we experienced during COVID as humanitarian organizations, where we couldn't parachute 25 people within days of disasters. Young people with degrees from Western institutions coming into a country they've never been to, and doing humanitarian work, we realized we can't do that. And so we found innovative ways, and just like lo and behold, people on the ground, local people are able to do the work as well, if not better than humanitarian agencies. So I think I hope this forces the industry to reset that kind of colonial mindset of the way of working, and change it from sort of the doers of the work to kind of enablers or the fundraisers, the advocacy. I fully agree with my colleague here about advocacy skills that are really needed for us to be working with our governments to procure funding, or governments and partners and others to bring funding closer to the field and really shift that power dynamic between funded and the funders.
Thank you. Okay. Unless there are any more questions from the audience and any online. Oh, Jacinta's commented, I also think that the role of unions and unionizing to harness the power of collective action is going to become more and more important. Yeah, I think that as well. That would be very interesting to see. If we don't have any more direct question, oh, Stab, we've got another one. Do we have the second mic?
In terms of the role of the advocacy, I mean, there are the aid flows, and I totally agree on sort of the focus on localization. But we also know that there are sort of international issues like taxation, like labour standards, you know, all these things that can have a much greater impact on sort of equality or reducing poverty. And so what's the role of our organisations in those spaces in terms of what we're currently doing, but what we could potentially be doing more of? I work for ActionAid for a short time, and they do some phenomenal work on sort of global issues, but like Australian banks or fossil fuel companies, as well as doing work on sort of fairer taxation systems and trade systems.
Thank you. Very interesting comment. So we might wrap up with one final question to you all then. Obviously, this topic has the potential to be very challenging and distressing. It's hard to consider all of the programs that have been lost, the people who have been impacted, both people on the ground who are, you know, being supported by these programs and the people delivering them. But to end on a more hopeful note, I think you've all touched on some of the positives that are coming out of it and the ways that we can move forward. Would each of you like to reflect on a way that you think things can be better through this? Perhaps we've touched on, you know, breaking down those colonial structures that have existed for so long, focusing more on locally led development. So what's a positive that you see for the way forwards as we deal with this?
Thank you. I believe building resilience is still important and still positive. And resilience, it could be in person or the capacity of the organizations. So having a proper plan to support a community or the organization will itself be a very positive outcome. So even without funding, you can have a plan to support the organization. And we do have a lot of technical expertise that doesn't require a massive funding to support. So I think that could be one positive note that we can continue even if there is a break of funding in the future. And I think the most important is, as we have already discussed, the localization, locally led, but it's more important is empowering the women in those communities, because if one woman in the household is empowered, the whole family benefits. It's an old saying, but it is a true saying, and which we have seen and, you know, experienced through a number of years working in different communities. So still, I think investing in women, even if it's a small amount, even if the budget is very small, making sure that the women are participated, making sure that the women are benefited, making sure they are in the advocacy, making sure that they are, the budget caters the women need. So I think that is really important and positive if we continue. Yeah.
Thanks. I would agree with that focus on women and girls. And I think, like we all know in our personal lives, nothing like a limited budget focuses us on the things that are really important and the impact. So for us, it's really stepping back and saying, are our programs the most impactful that they can possibly be? And are we spending our donors' money as wisely as we possibly can be spending it? Not that there's a lot of waste, but I think it's really important that we all step back and reflect on that. And so really thinking through that. And I think it does force us to get creative, which is kind of fun. And I think it stretches us to think really differently about what our assumptions have always been around funding and fundraising and traditional sources of doing that.
Yeah, I think we have now seen what these authoritarian anti-rights movements and organizations are able to accomplish within a very short period of time. I think organizations and individuals who work on progressive causes need to be able to come together around issues that we fully, that we agree on. I think evidence consistently demonstrates that feminists, social justice movements are the most effective drivers of progressive policy. They influence laws on gender-based violence, sexual reproductive health, anti-discrimination, and their influence is more important than that of national wealth, parliamentary representation, or even party ideology. So I think despite this evidence, we continuously underfunded the movement work, and so I think and the work of that movement of organizing is inherently political. The work that we do within our organization around movement building and more broadly is really important. So I think that's my hope, that we are able to be stronger as a movement for more progressive causes, and we use this as a hard lesson learned to come together among and despite our differences.
Thank you all. I think it's good to end on a positive on a topic as heavy as this, that there are always going to be people like our fabulous speakers and everyone here tonight who's going to continue working in the sector to improve it, to keep going past everything that's happening. So it's always good to reflect on that at the end. So this has been an absolutely fantastic discussion, but unfortunately it is about time that we wrap it up. So can you please join me in thanking our speakers for their time and their fantastic insights? I'd also like to thank the rest of the Women in Aid and Development Leadership Group who've supported the smooth running of tonight's event, and to Canva, as always, for hosting us in their fantastic space. And a special thank you to Chris as our chair, who brings us all together. So that brings us to the end of the discussion portion of the event. Please feel free to stay in touch with us through our social media, either our website, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn. And I highly recommend that you join the mailing list to stay updated on events and opportunities as they come up. And if you'd like to become a Women in Aid and Development member, you have the opportunity to participate in our mentoring program, in addition to free ticket events and all that sort of thing. So on that note, I will hand over to Chris briefly to talk about the mentoring program.
You. And just one quick one. I'm very slack. I left my bag at home. So your fabulous Women in Aid and Development mugs will be coming to you through the mail instead. Very exclusive. You only get them if you're a speaker. Thank you, Jamie Lee. Thanks to Jamie Lee for great facilitation. Appreciate that. We were just asked if we could give a little bit on our mentoring program. People are always curious about that one. It's one of the main things we run that does a great deal of value in terms of helping women. The program's been running for a while. We encourage all people who would like to be a mentor to come through to basically give a younger person, early career person, a hand up. But not just that, we also help everyone. So we've had a couple of CEOs go through our mentoring program too as mentees. We run 2 programs a year. We aim to match people as carefully as we can in terms of what the skill area is and what they'd like to know. We have 3 levels. So we have a full mentoring face-to-face over 12 months, a one-to-one program. We also run a program for people who are just changing in their careers. They'd like to maybe change jobs or go for a more senior role, and they just like a bit of advice on how to improve a CV, improve cover letters, and get some interview techniques from someone who's already been through that and maybe is in that sort of role. And then we run our small group mentoring, and that's for students, interns, people in the corporate sector who want to move into the sector. And it's a series of 4 workshops designed to provide information on getting your CV ready, looking at how you can get into volunteering or intern roles, having a look at LinkedIn profiles, and bringing in someone who can talk about the area we're interested in. So, for example, this current round will be running a session on policy and monitoring and evaluation for the interest of people coming through. Very popular. People who go through the program definitely get into the sector, get that first step up. And of course, if anybody's really keen, we always love to have volunteers. Our volunteers and our interns, again, those who come through and stick with the program, they do tend to go through because we'll give a reference and they are going through and getting roles. And we definitely need a couple of volunteers in Sydney. Would be great for these events, which means come along, have a drink, have something to eat and chat to people mostly. So I think that's all I needed to cover. Again, thank you so much to our speakers. Great evening. We really appreciate your expertise. And again, thank you to Jamie Lee, our facilitator, and good night. And thanks to everyone online. We appreciate you coming along too. Thank you.
Alrighty, yep, thanks everyone. And we will hopefully see you at our final event of 2025, which will be held in December. And we'll be looking at the ACFID State of the Sector report and reflecting on the year that was. So have a good night.